The following readings are from the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. Each week we read from both scriptures as prescribed by Yoganandaji and by his guru Sri Yukteswarji, who was guided by Babaji to compare the two scriptures to show the same underlying truths between them. This reading is entitled Disinterested Action, the Way to Inner Peace. This reading is from the Bible, from the Gospel of St. Luke. Now it came to pass as they went that he, meaning Jesus, entered into a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, which also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was cumbered about, much serving, and came to him and said, Lord, dost thou not care that my sister hath left me to serve alone? Bid her therefore that she help me. Some things are eternal. And Jesus answered and said unto her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful, and Mary hath chosen that good part, which shall not be taken away from her. Swamiji writes, this story is commonly, but mistakenly, taken as contrasting two spiritual modes of living, that of outward service with that of inward contemplation and prayer. Most people classify themselves as Marthas, often with the rueful excuse, well, we Marthas of this world are needed too. Jesus, however, wasn't scolding Martha for the useful service she was rendering. Throughout his earthly mission, he praised both types of devotees, the busy and the meditative. In this story, he clearly wasn't drawing a comparison between two valid paths to God. He wasn't saying, for example, what you are doing, Martha, is good, but Mary's silent absorption is even better. In telling Martha, Mary's is the only right way, he was quite simply rebuking her for her restlessness, her work-centeredness. Martha's error was one common to devotees everywhere. In her busyness, even though she was working for God, she lost sight of the true purpose of spiritual service. The world had become for her all the dishes steaming on the stove, the endless dicing and splicing and sifting and spicing she had to do to prepare the best possible meal for her honored guests. Had her attitude been spiritually right, her thoughts would have been centered in God, even in the heat of this activity. She would not have surrendered her calmness and inner joy to the pressures of work. More important, she would not have lost inward touch with Jesus' consciousness and vibrations. This is not to say that Martha failed to receive any rewards for her hard work. She simply missed the highest spiritual reward, divine realization. Her sin, in other words, was one of omission, not one of commission. She saw her relationship to Jesus as that to a righteous man, not to a prophet. Jesus, on another occasion, explained the importance of drawing the highest blessings from a true master. He that receiveth a prophet in the name of a prophet, he said, shall receive a prophet's reward. And he that receive a righteous man in the name of a righteous man shall receive a righteous man's reward. A prophet lives in God. A righteous man, on the other hand, is one whose consciousness is still centered in the ego. He performs good deeds, but more because he believes in the goodness than because he knows God. He may not even believe in God. To receive a prophet's reward means to attract the best that the prophet has to offer, God consciousness itself. To receive a righteous man's reward, on the other hand, means to acquire good karma, a happy and fortunate life, in other words, here on earth and in heaven, but bondage still to the ego and to the consciousness of separation from God. Chains, as it has been wisely said, though of gold, still bind. To receive a prophet, quote, in the name of a prophet, means to attune oneself to him in the spirit. Service to him should be seen primarily as a means of deepening one's attunement with God's grace as it flows through master to disciple. The same flow continues onward through the disciples. Jesus, after speaking of receiving a prophet's reward, said, "Believe me, anyone who gives even a drink of water to one of these little ones, only in the name of a disciple, that is, because he is my disciple, will by no means lose his reward." Martha in this story exemplifies those superficial devotees who, even while serving God, forget the true purpose of their service. Jesus would surely have praised Martha, and might even have sent Mary to help her, had he found her centered in God instead of in her work, and had he seen her working with non-attachment and inner joy. What he wanted of her was not that she stop working, but only that she not lose touch with God's love in her heart. Service performed with a devotional attitude is ever purifying. It is a means of opening the heart to God's love. It is also one of the most important means of developing that sensitive awareness by which his love can be channeled to all. Jesus' first teaching in this passage concerns the right, serviceful attitude that should be assumed by every devotee. His second teaching concerns the importance of inner communion, the example of which was set by Mary. Mary's comportment here merits separate treatment. It will be discussed in next week's commentary. Meanwhile, let us remember that to live for God means above all to live with Him, in the thought of Him, and in the awareness of His presence, of His eternal love within. Now, this next reading is from the Bhagavad Gita, from the 2nd chapter. Actions performed under the influence of desire are greatly inferior to those which are guided by wisdom. Happiness eludes people when they act from motives of self-interest. Seek shelter, therefore, in the equanimity of wisdom. The Bhagavad Gita is emphasizing the eternal need for offering the I principle into the expansion of soul consciousness. Restless activity is never wholly free of ego motivation, even when it is offered devotedly to God. For restlessness is allied to ego consciousness. Without equanimity, the best that even the sincere devotee can do is affirm soul consciousness. He cannot realize it. The Gita's warning is not against right, wisdom-guided action. Such action, rather, directed without selfish motive, is one of the best ways to achieve divine freedom. Actions that are motivated by self-interest lead to mental and emotional bondage. Attachment produces anxiety in the mind. When such action results in failure, its psychological fruits are disappointment, discouragement, and other negative mental states. And when it results in success, it brings on an almost equally soul-disturbing fever of excitement, which the mind merely confuses with happiness. Desireless actions alone bring inner peace. While one should renounce selfish motives, the devotee should work ever enthusiastically, not for himself, but for the welfare of all, and above all, to please God. The conclusive argument against desire-motivated action is that it defeats its own purpose. People who act from selfish motives hope, thereby, to attain happiness, but in this hope they are forever disappointed. Life's fulfillments alternate with equal measures of disappointment. Even in those fleeting moments, moreover, when human happiness is realized, it cannot be compared with soul joy. How pale a response is human happiness to the deeper expectations of the soul. People even define their happiness in negative terms. Asked, "How are you?" they reply, Not bad. The connection people normally see between desire fulfillment and happiness is a simple case of mistaken identity. All they really do is project expectations of happiness onto the world around them. The seat of happiness, however, is never outside oneself. It lies within. Pleasure itself is experienced in the brain, not in the body. Mankind lives in a world not of things, but of consciousness. The Bhagavad Gita doesn't ask us to renounce self-interest on faith alone. We should make an impartial study of life. From any such investigation, it is easy to see that self-interest can only obstruct true happiness. Observe little children, how bursting they are with energy and enthusiasm. Study them as they grow older and begin spinning life ambitions for themselves. Someday, they say, I will be wealthy. I will find a loving wife or husband, raise a happy family, build a beautiful home, attain fame, become influential. See them at the age, say, 17. How the future stretches out before their mental gaze, verdant with hope. Then see them at 25. Already their eyes reveal a certain tension, their voices a degree of hardness. Life is turning out to be rather more of a struggle than they first bargained for. But they still manage to cling trustingly to their dreams. See them again at 40, irascible, tired, perhaps already discouraged. And see them at last, after the race has been run, at 60, 70, 75. Most of them are a spent force. How little they have to show for their lives of arduous labor. A survey was once made of people in their late 30s and 40s. One of the questions asked was, as you look back, what do you remember as the happiest occasion of your life? A high percentage replied, my high school prom. They'd never known happiness in their lives, you see. But as teenagers, at least, their dream ship of happiness had yet to crash on the rocky coast of hard reality. The fulfillment of one desire usually leads to the creation of still further desires, for desire conditions the mind to seek fulfillment outside itself. An apt metaphor for this desire-generating process is the 9-headed Hydra, a Greek monster of classical fame. Every time one of the Hydra's heads was stricken off, another would grow out of its place. Hercules found the solution. After cutting off each of the Hydra's heads, he quickly cauterized the stump before a new one could grow out again. Desires must be prevented from growing out again. The best time to rid yourself of a desire, Paramahansa Yogananda taught, is the very moment when you first think of it. Self-affirmation induces self-limitation. Ego-centeredness builds its own prison. It contracts a person's consciousness, closing him off from life. The selfish person hopes to create a self-support system in the things he acquires. In the end, however, he feels himself stranded and alone, as though in a hostile universe. It is unselfish people who are always happy. Their sympathy and their consciousness expand ever outward toward freedom in God consciousness. Action without personal motive, guided steadfastly by the equanimity of wisdom, is one of the surest ways of attaining everlasting happiness. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about this. You know, as Swamiji wrote, devotees tend to have this issue of the Martha versus Mary quite a bit. maybe because a devotee often is naturally serviceful, naturally wants to help others. Naturally, if you're a parent, you're naturally wanting to help your children or your family, or, there's this natural desire to help. And what Swamiji is saying is we really have to see what our end goal is in all of it. Because if it's just to get approval, to get a certain response, to, I did this, now God, give me what I asked for, or I did this for my children, how can they do this back to me? Or the children saying, hey, my parents won't get off my back. There's two sides to that equation. And so there's all this push-pull that happens around serving others, and, sometimes the women in the family are kind of forced into that service role and don't know how to balance that. That happens for a lot of people, where you just kind of feel forced into it and you're just doing it because you have to. That there's those kind of service things we do also where we're serving the family. But the thing is, if we can have our daily meditation practice, we're 90% there. That's the best part of this whole story, is just having that regular practice every day that will help us immerse ourselves into the divine. Because if you're not feeling it now, it's that sticking to it that will help it come sooner or later, that feeling of devotion, that feeling of the divine love. And it's with that feeling that we can serve others. If you look back in your life, and of course the older you get, the more experiences you have, all the times we've served people, what does it really add up to? You can say it adds up to nothing. Who remembers anything? Who remembers the time you did you gave tea to this one person, or you made a cake for that person, or whatever? Perhaps that one person does remember that, but it all kind of blurs. And so then you can say, well, what is it all for? But if you can get a warm feeling in your heart about it all, then you know that you've probably pleased God in your service. You can feel as though, you have given it up to the divine, that you have, there's a lot of words sometimes where it says, please God. What does that really mean? How do I please God? Well, first we have to listen. What did God ask us to do? What is God asking us to do? And then if we listen and we say, yeah, I'm going to do that, that is pleasing God. And it's not just out of unconditional obedience. God likes us to have cooperative obedience. The Guru likes us to have cooperative obedience. If we do just blind obedience, we're doing it like a robot. He said do that, I do this. As opposed to having feelings that are involved in it as well. The Guru, I asked the Guru, what should I do here? And I felt his response. What a beautiful feeling that is. Then you might argue, why should I do that? Why are you asking me to do that? You can ask that. Why do you want me to do that? That doesn't feel good. I don't really want to do that. So tell me, why should I do that? And then you meditate again. And you hear, this is why you should do that. If it really was from God. If it really was something God wanted you to do. This is why. Master talked a lot about how he would argue with Divine Mother Why do you have to have people suffer on this planet? And so we can have that conversation with the divine. We can have that conversation with Master. It's not sacrilegious to say why. Especially if you can say it in the right attitude. If you're like, why, what do you know? That's not really the right attitude. But if you just say, why, I can feel something inside of me that just doesn't want to do it that way. So help me untwist that knot. That helps me do it in the way that you are suggesting I do it. Because the Guru gives us guidance that has the least amount of, it might have a lot of effort, but it gets us to God the fastest way. So it might be a difficult decision that He gives us. But if we can break through and do it that way, of course you have to be clear that that's what He's asking you to do. But we have to get clear on that, and then if we can do it with a clean heart, do it with I had to have an argument a little bit with Master on that one, and I just wasn't sure how it would turn out. I was a little nervous about that, but it did work out. It did turn out to be the right thing to do. And the more we have those experiences, the more we develop that relationship with the divine. To get that call, we pray, and then we get the response. And so when we're going to serve others, we want to have that prayer that goes out. Like, suppose you just don't feel like it, then that prayer, is this the right thing for me to do? It feels like I can do it, or I have no choice, so Master, give me the strength to do it. Whatever it is, it's always a conversation. It's always a back and forth. It's not just a good devotee does this, therefore I am a robot and I do what the good devotee does and I repress all my feelings all the time and I just do what I should do all the time, not what I'm feeling God is asking me to do. So the same happens in service where, okay, Master, give me that inspiration. Not that, give me that satisfaction, or what's the right word for it? Give me the pleasure to do it, or give me give me something, what do I get out of it type thing. It's not that. You want it to come from just this clean heart that says, I'm going to be connected to you while I do this service. And you can't just say it. You have to meditate and develop that relationship that allows you to say, this is what I'm doing, and now work through me as I do this. No matter what that service is, work through me. And you can feel God's presence while you're doing it. You can feel that presence if you work at it, if you really work to develop that relationship. And really, both of these readings from the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, they are both saying, here's how to be happy. Don't be attached. Often we see parents who, are giving to their children, but it's usually for a big payback someday, And then the payback never comes. The betrayal comes. And then, so as a devotee, catch yourself now before that betrayal can come. Children have their own karma. They are not one with you, and they're not meant to fulfill your karma. You fulfill your karma, they fulfill their karma, and unfortunately, for the parent who might have other ideas, that child is going to have a karma that makes them do what they're meant to do, even if it includes mistakes, even if it includes them doing heartbreaking things to themselves. Sometimes, of course, you have to intervene. But as adults, we have to just do what we feel to do. Once people hit the age of, maybe it's 25 in India, in America it's definitely 18. You're an adult now, 18, How old is it in India? It seems a little bit older because of the group families and things, which is not a bad thing. But at some point, someone's an adult. It's not just a relation of, I'm the younger brother, you're the middle brother, you're the oldest brother, here's the pecking order, that kind of stuff. It's more like, I'm an adult, you're an adult, you're an adult. We're all adults here. We're responsible for our own feelings. And I won't give you grief if you don't give me grief. Come to an agreement somehow. And if they just give you grief only and you're doing your best, then you have to make decisions, what you're going to do, what will lead to your happiness. And this is where we ask Master for the guidance on that. We know many people in heartbreaking situations. So there's no cookie cutter to how to deal with stuff. But if you're the one causing trouble for other people, then take a good, long, hard look at yourself and just try and figure out why. What's your motivation? And it's really helpful to say, what's my motivation? Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? What is my attachment? And so I wanted to bring in all of this because, this month we're celebrating Swamiji for his birthday, and also Sri Yukteswarji's birthday was yesterday, so we have a very special time going on right now. And, Swamiji really showed how to do service with the right heart about things. And, a lot of times you can also look at service as outward energy versus inward energy. And whenever he would do a big outward push, like speaking at a satsang even, or speaking at a public function, or writing a big long book, whatever he did when he was putting energy out, he always balanced it with the energy in. Not just with meditation, he did that, but also with fun. He would make sure that he would go on a nice vacation after doing a big amount of work and have that restful time. So it included meditation, but it was also restful, so that when he came to his next thing he had to do, he would be fully rested and ready to be open to new inspiration on what his next step was. And we saw this over and over again with him, and it was quite an inspiration to see him do this. After a big public talk, the next day he did not want to see anybody. He was, we always seclude on Mondays at least, if not Tuesdays as well, after satsangs. And he would definitely go into seclusion and draw the energy back into the spine. That chant that I chanted, why, O mind, wanderest thou? And then it goes right into Kundalini yoga and pranayams and sushumnas and irdas and pingalas, which level 2, luckily, Raja Yoga level 2 covers all those terms. But it's really just that. It's just as simple as that. Is we draw our energy in, we're happy. The energy goes out, we're unhappy. And it's more out and down and in and up. But, these teachings are really about how to be happy. And so I wanted to read from Sri Yukteswarji's Holy Science, just to honor him a little bit. And this is related to how we can be happy. So he talks, the Holy Science has some, it has some difficult parts that are hard to understand, where he's talking about the koshas and the layer after layer after layer of spiritual bodies and things like that. You can certainly memorize it. I don't know if you can relate to it like, yeah, I have felt that. I've felt the 12th kosha. Yeah, that makes sense. It's more along Master's Mahasamadhi, or not Mahasamadhi, Master's Samadhi experience with the poem Samadhi in Autobiography of a Yogi, where it's very cosmic and mystical. But if you're just reading it on the page, he writes it in a very matter-of-fact way, which probably does make sense to some people and is helpful. But you can skip those parts, and you can find a lot of really helpful parts in the Holy Science. We'll probably have to do a class on it again. And so anyway, I love this part of it. There's a few of my most favorite quotes from this book. This one is about the 8 meannesses of the heart. And they are aspects of ourselves that if we stop doing them, it leads to happiness. So if we can just stop doing this behavior, then we can feel happy. And so this is what he writes. The 8 meannesses of the heart. Firmness of moral courage. The 8 bondages or snares are hatred, shame, fear, grief, condemnation, race prejudice, pride of family, and smugness. And so I wanted to make sure I was... So I just want to kind of define some of this, because you say shame and you go, okay, shame. But shame really can mean like you are telling someone that you are nothing and you deserve nothing, and then the person feels like they don't deserve to be. So that is the shaming thing. We've all either encountered it or done it. The hatred, of course, that doesn't need definition. Fear. So removing fear, if we can find a way to do that. Grief. Okay, so for condemnation, let's see, I wrote a little note. Yeah, so for condemnation, it's a strong rebuke. How could you do that? Kind of like a righteous indignation. Like, I would never do that, but you did that. How could you? The thing we like to say often is, there but for the grace of God go I. Meaning, anyone can make that mistake. Anyone could. Unfortunately, if I were in your shoes, maybe I would do the same thing. But instead, it's this condemnation, that kind of a thing. Race prejudice, that's pretty obvious. Pride of family. So that's being proud just based on your ancestry. Caste system, I think, is probably what Sri Yukteswarji. And smugness. And I was like, now what is smug? Excessive pride in oneself or one's achievements. It's easy to use the word, say, that person's very smug. But, really, what does it mean? So I thought, I'm going to look that one up and just make sure it's obvious, but I like the definition. Excessive pride in oneself or one's achievements. Really what that means is you define yourself by these things, some of these things at least. And that's not who we are. We're not this. So this is what he says. The 8 meannesses of the heart. Firmness of moral courage, when attained, removes all the obstacles in the way of salvation. These obstacles are of 8 sorts. hatred, shame, fear, grief, condemnation, race prejudice, pride of pedigree, and a narrow sense of respectability. Which eight are the meannesses of the human heart? Awakening magnanimity of the heart. By the removal of these 8 obstacles, magnanimity of the heart comes in. And this makes man fit for the practice of asana, remaining in steady and pleasant posture, pranayama, control over prana, involuntary nerve electricities, and pratyahara, changing the direction of the voluntary nerve currents inward. These practices enable man to satisfy his heart by enjoying the objects of the senses as intended for domestic life. So, he not only says, take these things away, but then he explains how they contribute to pranayama and pratyahara. And so, very interesting. Especially, pratyahara is a thing we aim for. That is the withdrawal of the energy that is constantly going out of our chakras. It comes in and then goes up. And that is how it's called awakening the chakras as well. That pratyahara is that withdrawal that brings that energy in. I just find it a beautiful thing. And that is one of the keys to happiness. Sri Yukteswarji talks a lot about pratyahara and withdrawing the energy and that kind of thing, and how it's part of the key to happiness. Because if the energy is only going out and trying to fulfill outwardly, either through approval by others or through doing things just to get, then that's the opposite of pratyahara. So our meditation practices naturally induce pratyahara. The practice of trying to let go of these 8 meannesses of heart naturally induces pratyahara. And so these are like astral, physical things that happen because of human action. It's quite nice. I like it when the human action actually directly affects the spiritual body. That's the definition basically of Kriya Yoga. Okay, so the other part I want to read is Sri Yukteswar, his experience with Babaji. And I bring this up because I just read from the Holy Science. Well, what was some of his main experience with Babaji? It's meeting Babaji at the Kumbh Mela, and Babaji saying, write the Holy Science. So we just read the Holy Science, or part of it. And then we also say at the beginning of every reading we do here that we are comparing the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita, and that is what Babaji asked Swami Sri Yukteswarji to do, to write a book that compares the two, kind of representing all of scriptures, that there's a oneness in the scripture, getting religion out of it, assuming the scripture is written in a holy way, in a way that is sacred and mystical, taking away the religious aspect of things. Just as itself, it is both of these things can be interpreted in a mystical way. Yoganandaji did so much for us on that. But then Sri Yukteswarji wrote it in the Holy Science, and that was the beginning of really what we do every Sunday satsang. Okay, so this is chapter 36, Babaji's interest in the West. Master, did you ever meet Babaji? This is Yoganandaji asking Sri Yukteswarji. It was a calm summer night in Serampore. The large stars of the tropics gleamed over our heads as I sat by Sri Yukteswar's side on the second-story balcony of the Hermitage. Yes, Master smiled at my direct question, his eyes lit with reverence. 3 times I have been blessed by the sight of the deathless Guru. Our first meeting was in Allahabad at the Kumbh Mela. The religious fairs held in India since time immemorial are known as Kumbh Melas. They have kept spiritual goals in constant sight of the multitude. Devout Hindus gather by the millions every 6 years to meet thousands of sadhus, yogis, swamis, and ascetics of all kinds. Many are hermits who never leave their secluded haunts except to attend the melas and bestow their blessings on worldly men and women. I was not a Swami at the time I met Babaji, Sri Yukteswar went, but I had already received Kriya initiation from Lahiri Mahashaya. He encouraged me to attend the Mela, which was convening in January 1894 at Allahabad. It was my first experience of a kumbha, and Sri Yukteswar Ji was born 1845 or 55. I thought I wrote it down, did it? 1855. So that was 170 years ago. Isn't it amazing how all of this still applies? Let's see. It was my first experience of a kumbha. I felt slightly dazed by the clamor and surge of the crowd. In my searching gazes around, I saw no illumined face of a master. Passing a bridge on the bank of the Ganges, I noticed an acquaintance standing nearby, his begging bowl extended. Oh, this fair is nothing but a chaos of noise and beggars, I thought in disappointment. I wonder if scientists, patiently enlarging the realms of knowledge for the practical good of mankind, are not more pleasing to God than these idlers who profess religion but concentrate on alms. My smoldering reflections on social reform were interrupted by the voice of a tall sannyasi who halted before me. Sir, he said, a saint is calling you. Who is he? Come and see for yourself. Hesitantly following this laconic advice, I soon found myself near a tree whose branches were sheltering a guru with an attractive group of disciples. The master, a bright, unusual figure with sparkling dark eyes, rose at my approach and embraced me. Welcome, Swamiji, he said affectionately. Sir, I replied emphatically, I am not a Swami. Those on whom I am divinely directed to bestow the title of Swami never cast it off. The saint addressed me simply, but deep conviction of truth rang in his words. I was engulfed in an instant wave of spiritual blessings. Smiling at my sudden elevation into the ancient monastic order, I bowed at the feet of the obviously great and angelic being in human form who had thus honored me. Babaji, for it was indeed he, motioned me to a seat near him under the tree. He was strong and young and looked like Lahiri Mahashaya, yet the resemblance did not strike me, even though I had often heard of the extraordinary similarities in the appearance of the two masters. Babaji possesses a power by which he can prevent any specific thought from arising in a person's mind. Evidently, the great Guru wished me to be perfectly natural in his presence, not overawed by knowledge of his identity. What do you think of the Kumbh Mela? He said. I was greatly disappointed, sir, I added hastily. Up until the time I met you, somehow saints and this commotion don't seem to belong together. Child, the master said, though apparently I was nearly twice his own age, for the faults of the many judge not the whole. Everything on earth is of mixed character, like a mingling of sand and sugar. Be like the wise ant, which seizes only the sugar and leaves the sand untouched. Though many sadhus here still wander in delusion, yet the Mela is blessed by a few men of God realization. In view of my own meeting with this exalted master, said Sri Yukteswar Ji, I quickly agreed with his observation. Sir, I commented, I've been thinking of the scientific men of the West, greater by far in intelligence than most people congregated here, living in distant Europe and America, professing different creeds and ignorant of the real values of such melas as the present one. They are the men who could benefit greatly by meeting with India's masters. But although high in intellectual attainments, many Westerners are wedded to rank materialism. Others, famous in science and philosophy, do not recognize the essential unity in religion. Their creeds serve as insurmountable barriers that threaten to separate them from us forever. I saw that you are interested in the West as well as the East. Babaji's face beamed with approval. I felt the pangs of your heart, broad enough for all men, whether Oriental or Occidental. That is why I summoned you here. East and West must establish a golden middle path of activity and spirituality combined, he continued. India has much to learn from the West in material development. In return, India can teach the universal methods by which the West will be able to base its religious beliefs on the unshakable foundations of yogic science. You, Swamiji, have a part to play in the coming harmonious exchange between Orient and Occident. Some years hence, I shall send you a disciple whom you can train for yoga dissemination in the West. The vibrations there of many spiritual seeking souls come flood-like to me. I perceive potential saints in America and Europe awaiting to be awakened. At this point in his story, Sri Yukteswar turned his gaze fully on mine. My son, he said, smiling in the moonlight, you are the disciple that years ago... Oh, okay. At this point in his story, Sri Yukteswar turned his gaze fully on mine. Paramahansa Yogananda. My son, he said, smiling in the moonlight, you are the disciple that years ago Babaji promised to send me. I was happy to learn that Babaji had directed my steps to Sri Yukteswar, yet it was hard for me to visualize myself in the remote West, away from my beloved Guru and the simple hermitage peace. Babaji then spoke of the Bhagavad Gita. Sri Yukteswar went on. To my astonishment, he indicated by a few words of praise that he was aware of the fact that I had written interpretations on various Gita chapters. At my request, Swamiji, please undertake another task, the great master said. Will you not write a short book on the underlying basic unity between the Christian and Hindu scriptures? Show by parallel references that the inspired sons of God have spoken the same truths, now obscured by men's sectarian differences. Maharaj, I answered diffidently, what a command! Shall I be able to fulfill it? Babaji laughed softly. My son, why do you doubt? He said reassuringly, indeed, whose work is all this, and who is the doer of all actions? Whatever the Lord has made me say is bound to materialize as truth. I deemed myself empowered by the blessings of the saint and agreed to write the book. Feeling reluctantly that the parting hour had arrived, I rose from my leafy seat. So, I highly recommend you read the rest of the chapter, the whole book, of course, over and over again. But it's so sweet because he's speaking to Lahiriji afterwards, and he actually didn't realize it was Babaji. And so Lahiri says, didn't you recognize that was Babaji? And he said, no. And Lahiri said, well, of course, you probably didn't recognize him because he wanted you to not feel overwhelmed by who he was. And so then at another time, Sri Yukteswar goes to Raigat Lane and takes a dip in the Ganges. And on pilgrimages to Kolkata, we will go to this lane, and he talks about the the banyan tree that's there, which we see, and so Babaji was there with his disciples, and Sri Yukteswarji said, "Oh, I'm so excited to see you, and this is just so wonderful, and just stay here, and then I'm going to go get some sweets for you, and just stay here, stay here, stay here." And I doubt he said it like that. But as a master, he did something that was a little off that the other master could tell. And so there was a slight tremor inside of him probably, whereas we would be like this. And so anyway, Babaji disappeared because he was just too Rajasic for the Babaji and his clan at that time. But then another time, so Sri Yukteswar's feelings were hurt, he said. And sometimes you wonder, is the story really this way? Fully? Did this other avatar really have his feelings hurt by this avatar? hard to know, but it's a great story and it teaches us lessons about hurt feelings.
It was the only time I felt so relatable to Yukteswarji.
Yes.
The way he was
Yeah.
upset with Babaji.
Okay. And so, yeah, these masters want us to relate to them. And so even it's been said that Master, the Avatar, was born the Avatar, but still had to go through learning Kriya Yoga, which he knew as Arjuna during the Bhagavad Gita. So anyway, Krishna taught it to him back then. Anyway, it's still a beautiful story, and it's still filled with such beautiful vibrations. And so then, just to finish the story, Sri Yukteswarji goes over to Lahiri Mahashayas, and Lahiri Mahashaya says, "Didn't you see Babaji in the doorway?" Which we all know the story. And then he says, "No, I didn't see him." And then he turns around and is kind of withdrawn when he does see Babaji, because his feelings are still hurt. Are they? We don't know, but it's a great story. And so, anyway, so then Sri Babaji, clears things up. They both, and explains, look, you were too Rajasic for us. And so anyway, it's, such a deep spiritual truth. I'm not belittling anything that's said in it, but Swamiji would say that some of it was written for our sake, not as a fib or anything. It's all true. But, we are talking about avatars that are on a whole different level. So these stories bring it much more